And it's actually with great pleasure and honor to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Col Reyes.
Okay, thanks. Hi. It's nice to see all of you. I want to thank Dr. Cole for asking me to come by and talk a little bit about Battlemind. There's three phases of Battlemind training. Okay? What we're going to talk about today regarding Fort Hood is Battlemind concept before they deploy. Next slide. Oh, sure. Sure, Dr. Cole. Thank you. Dr. Cole's my battle buddy. Okay, so on November the 5th, 2009, Major Hassan, an Army psychiatrist of all people, and this is kind of the inside story that you don't hear in the news, he was tasked, because he had been working out of Darnell Army Medical Center there as a psychiatrist in division psychiatry. Okay, and in division psychiatry, it's a hospital-based unit. So what he does is, I understand he'd been doing medical evaluation boards. Okay, that was his job. Soldiers who've been coming back with some type of disability, he was evaluating them. Okay, so it's a very kind of low stressful job because it wasn't combat related. It's not in the field where he gets all muddied up. So what happened then is there's two units, the 1908th out of Kansas and the 467th out of Wisconsin. They get called to Afghanistan and Iraq. So they bring these two units for deployment to Fort Hood, Texas, because they have what they have to go through is what they call a medical SRP. It's Soldier Readiness Program. It's where they get their physicals. It's where they get clearance for their psych problems. It's where they get their immunizations and shots. So as soon as that SRP is complete and they're approved medically and psychologically, then they're sent to war. Okay? So what happens then is there are 3 active duty, what we call combat stress control units, and then 6 reserve combat stress control units. And these combat stress control units are generic psychiatric units. Okay, we provide Battlemind training and counseling for soldiers all the time. That's our job. And those units consist of a social worker, a psychologist, a psychiatric nurse, practitioner, and an occupational therapist. Okay, that consists of the officer corps. And then your enlisted corps consists of enlisted guys who are paraprofessionals, and they call them behavioral science specialists. They don't have the degree, but they receive about a year's worth of training in providing charting and group therapy and in kind of group therapy skills, okay, so that they are the backup to a provider. A provider is a social work officer, psychology officer, and a psychiatric nurse officer. So what happens then is these units do not have psychiatrists because psychiatrists never go out in the field, but social workers do. So what happens then, the 467th and 1908th are ready to deploy, and so they call on Dr. Hassan, who happens to be working there. Okay, so then he is what we call a backfill. He backfills into that unit so that when the 1908 from Kansas deploys, actually the 467th he was going to go with, and they deploy to Afghanistan, Dr. Hassan, or Major Hassan in this case, was going to deploy to Afghanistan with the units. But what happened that day is that for some reason, and we won't know until his trial is completed, why he didn't want to go, because he had numerous opportunities to go. If you're a psychiatrist, then there's a couple of ways that you can get out of deployment. Number one is you can give up your commission. And I know because I had one of the psychiatrists that deployed with me to Afghanistan. He was originally from Pakistan, and the Taliban had learned that Dr. Haroon is his name. He had deployed, so they killed one of his family members as payback. So he said, no more, you know, I love my family, but I don't love the Army as much anymore. I'm giving up my commission. So as a psychiatrist, he gave it up. The other thing that they can do is they can seek a JAG, okay, representation. JAG is a Judge Advocate General Corps. These are the Army lawyers, and seek to get out of the military or seek not to deploy. So he knew his options, but for some reason, which we won't know for a long time, he decided that if he was not going to, that if he was going to go to Iraq or Afghanistan, then he would kill other people so that he doesn't have to go to Iraq or Afghanistan. And to me, that's very perverted thinking. Okay? So what happens then is why this created so many deaths is because I was telling Dr. Cole earlier and Mike Herbert earlier that they knew him because he was picked to go on their deployment with them. So they didn't think anything of it that day until he literally walked in one afternoon on the 5th, and then all of a sudden, being a major, he said, "Attention!" And you know, for all you guys and gals out there, when a senior level, a field grade officer says, "Attention!" everybody stands up. So everybody in the SRP medical building stood up for this major, and he summarily took his pistols and just started to rock and roll on all the poor, innocent people waiting to get their medical examinations. Okay? So they were all basically sitting duck. And the thing about it is, there are 5 providers that were killed that day from his unit. Okay? There was 2 psychiatric nurses, 1 clinical psychologist, 1 behavioral science specialist, and 1 occupational therapist. That was Lieutenant Colonel Mormon. Okay, so he knew these people, well, if not intimately, he knew these people because he was going to deploy with them. So the biggest issue that we have now is kind of trust. Who do you trust? We thought that we could trust our own people in uniform, but now this distorts it. Part of being combat stress control as a social worker is you have to kind of be accountable for your ad, but you're also mobile. So that's why you're credentialed. If you're licensed, then you bring your credentials with you, because whatever post you're assigned to, you'll get credentialed there, and you'll be able to see their patients at their post. What are the functions of traumatic event management? There are several. First of all is the unit needs assessment. It's when you sit down with the leadership and you ask the leadership, what do you need? What kind of mental health problems are you experiencing? How has your unit been affected to this day since that event on November the 5th? Okay? So with that unit needs assessment, or that UNA we call it, you kind of get a baseline on what the symptoms are. The second one is consultation and education. We meet with the first line leaders. We meet with the unit commander or the first sergeant, and we ask them, well, what kind of personnel problems are you experiencing? Can you identify anybody that you think we might have to spend a little extra time with? Okay? And then third, again, is trauma event management. That's the overall structure of how we conduct our behavioral health mission. And then unit reconstitution support. That is when we actually provide mental health screenings for the soldiers so that we can identify what their individual psychodynamic issues are. Okay? Because when we did the consultation and education, we found out how they are affected as a unit, but it isn't until we get into unit reconstitution support when we provide individual screenings where we will find their individual mental health needs. Okay? Next is COSC triage. That's when we actually see the client after he's screened, and if we find out that he has long-term mental health needs, then we will refer the client out to long-term continuing care therapy. Okay? Now, one thing I need to mention is stabilization. We are just first responders, and that's what my team did. Is we were there for 2 weeks. So what we did is we did the debriefings, we did the initial contacts, we did the mental health screenings, and we did the referrals. But being a first responder, being a prevention unit, we do not do long-term therapy. And that's the next phase. We left at phase number 3, which is the long-term individual psychotherapy phase. We handed off that mission to the mental health clinics and the TRICARE folks and the contractors there to set up long-term therapy so that the people and the soldiers can get the help that they need on a long-term basis. Okay, well, what are you looking for when an individual is going through a traumatic stress like these folks did? There was 13 individuals killed and about 30 individuals wounded in action. So how does that affect us dynamically as individuals? Well, when an individual goes through traumatic stress, there are 3 cluster symptoms that an individual experiences. And let's call them the RAW symptoms, okay? RAA, the acronym for Rah, 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 Sis, Boom, Bah. Glad we're here, bah, bah, bah. Okay, so the first one is re-experiencing the trauma. What happens then when a person experiences a traumatic event is the person plays back those horrible images in his or her mind as a way to kind of integrate that into her psyche, right? Did you guys ever watch the movie The Exorcist? I remember that movie was so scary that we had to walk into a Denny's restaurant afterwards because the scenes of her kind of floating in the air and her head turning around 15 times horrified me. So my way of kind of coping was to kind of play back that horrible scene in my mind over and over and over again so that I can learn to integrate it. Well, that's what happens to individuals who experience or witness horrific combat events, is that they replay that horrific image of their mind over and over and over again. And that takes the form of nightmares because the person kind of plays back those images when he's asleep. Sometimes he'll have difficulty falling back to sleep because he's always constantly replaying those scenes of horror over and over again. And the other one is what we call intrusive thoughts or intrusive memories. It's as if you're daydreaming and all of a sudden the image comes back of when your friend was shot in front of you. Well, you replay that image again in your mind because for you it kind of helps you deal with it a lot better. Okay? And then third is what we call flashbacks. Flashbacks is that, let me put it to you this way. Our body uses 6 of our senses when we experience trauma as a way for us to kind of cope with it, right? You are finally in tune with your sense of smell, your sense of hearing, your tactile senses are all highly activated. So at that point then, they all have associations with that trauma. So let's say that I have one client, for instance, he became traumatized with a pack of cigarettes. Why? Because when I was at Fort Irwin, he was my client and he came back from the first invasion of Iraq. He was doing guard duty one day and there was this young 16-year-old boy, right? He was trying to help his family earn some money because the Taliban had decimated the entire country. There was no economy. So he was selling Marlboro cigarettes. Well, him being the sentry point, he had kind of a field of fire. And his first sergeant told him, anybody who steps within 100 yards of you, first of all, you warn, then you fire a warning shot, then you shoot to kill. So this young man said, hey, any of you Americans, you know, he didn't say Americans, but he was just kind of waving because he wanted the American soldiers to buy his cigarettes. Well, he didn't understand English, and then my patient didn't understand Farsi. So what happens then when people don't communicate, nothing is understood. So the boy walked into his field of fire, and my guy was so scared, he said, don't come any further, don't come any further. But he just kept walking because he wanted to earn a living for his family. And then he fired a warning shot. He was kind of put aback for a couple of minutes, but then he just continued his movements, and he moved forward into his line of fire, and my soldier shot him and killed him. So he came back feeling very guilty, and he was grieving. So whenever he saw anybody smoking a pack of cigarettes, that would kind of reignite his trauma all over again. So he'd feel like he was back in Iraq all over again just by visually sighting the pack of Marlboro cigarettes. So what happens then in a traumatic situation? Well, people react 2 different ways. You can either adapt to trauma, or you could show maladaptive behaviors. And there's really numerous stories that our clients were telling us what they experienced after the attack happened. For the adaptive behaviors, people show team spirit, people show a sense of heroism, people show mutual assistance, people show strong physical endurance, and people show the fact that they are able to maintain relationships with battle buddies throughout the war. Okay? For the maladaptive behaviors, people end up blaming each other. They argue with each other. They drink too much. They AWOL. They have poor work performance. Okay? Depending on an individual's background and his what we call prodromal history, then an individual reacts to stress in his or her own way. I saw someone who told me that Captain Gaffney, who is one of the soldiers killed, he was from San Diego, and he actually worked for San Diego County Mental Health. Well, as soon as the shooter came through the front door, Captain Gaffney grabbed a folding chair and he basically charged the guy. He was standing there with these two weapons, but he took his folding chair and he charged the guy and he threw his folding chair at him. But he was outgunned because apparently Captain Gaffney died with like bullets right across his chest from just by being raked by automatic fire. But it just tells you that some guys like Captain Gaffney are real heroes because they tried to do something about it. Okay? Who knows what possessed him? But I know that he wanted to take care of his people. Maladaptive behaviors. You hear some individuals, there was 3 individuals that we had to see on an individual basis because they were pointing fingers at each other. One individual said, look, I don't want to work with my officer in charge anymore because when the shooter came, my boss broke a window, she locked the door to her office, broke the outside window, opened the window with her hand, and jumped out the window and didn't even come back to see if we were okay. Okay? So what happens then in trauma, it separates, it divides people. If you have been having a dysfunctional relationship, it'll even disintegrate when the first sign of stress occurs. Okay? All right. So here we are. We did make contact with the 467th right after the memorial ceremony. And these are a group of officers then that were what we call the mobilizing team. These young ladies then were there at the time when the shooter came in, but luckily they were outside one of the buildings, so they were able to kind of escape. So this is what we do as a combat stress control team. You are mobile. You just basically walk the immediate area where the survivors are, and you just kind of press the flesh and walk to person and introduce yourself and say, hi, I'm one of the debriefers. My name is Col Reyes. I know things were very horrible for you, but I want to let you know I'm here for you. And if there's anything you want to talk about, let me know. So these 3 ladies said, yeah, let's sit down. You can see my psychiatrist there. She went down on her knees, on one knee, and my behavioral science specialist, he's sitting down with the 3 officers, and they're just listening to them. And all they do is ask open-ended questions. What happened to you that day? And when you're dealing with anybody that's experienced trauma, it's always good to ask open-ended questions, okay? Because then you're allowing them to ventilate their feelings. You're allowing them the opportunity to talk about anything they want to, and it's usually you are the first professional that they see, and they feel so indebted to you because you've acknowledged their trauma. So please remember open-ended questions when you're dealing with a person who's experienced some type of trauma, whether it's sexual assault, automobile accident, life-threatening illness. Any one of those traumatic situations, start with open-ended questions. Okay, there's 5 concepts of psychological first aid. Let's talk about the first one. Remember, the initial contact is the most important key, is develop a strong rapport with your individual, okay? Ask open-ended questions. Let him know that you're here for him or her, okay? Offer help. I'm here to help, okay? Number 1 is calmness. You need to reinforce the concept of the individual talking to you in a calm way. I know you have a story to tell, but let's think calm first so that you can be able to be in a position physically and emotionally to begin talking story, Okay? So this is the time you might want to utilize relaxation therapy or deep breathing exercises. A simple one is what we call the 1, 2, 3 deep breathing. I say, look, let's sit down over here on this curb, and I want you to take 3 deep breaths through your mouth. Breathe in through your mouth, breathe out through your mouth. Okay? Breathe in. Second time, breathe in, breathe out. Third time, breathe in, breathe out. And then once they've taken that third deep breath, after that exhalation, that's when you ask them, tell me in your own words what happened to you. Number 2 is establish a sense of hope, that you are here to provide them with a sense of optimism. Okay? I know things are horrible right now, but it won't be so bad in the next couple of days. Third is efficacy or competency. You want to encourage them to restore their sense of competency. Look, I know you were a good combat soldier. I'll help you get to that point, but right now, let's work on you. Let's work on getting your feelings out, okay? Because in the Army, you get thousands of dollars worth of specialized training to be the best person you can be, whether it's a rifleman or a welder, whatever. You want to help restore that person's sense of, what can I do, okay? Fourth is connectedness. You want to ask the person, well, do you have family here? Do you have a friend? Do you have a buddy that you can connect with? Let's get you guys going so that you guys can have dinner tonight, so that you feel that you have someone close to you that can hear you out, that you can ventilate to, that you feel strongly attached to. Because I'm not always going to be here. I'll be here maybe an hour a day, but your friend will be there 8 hours a day for you. So let's get you reconnected, okay? So that you have mutual assistance. And then safety. Reinforce the fact that although it isn't safe right now, steps are being taken to provide a better sense of safety and comfort for you here at the post. I know since we arrived then, the guards at the front gate were taking mirrors and they were looking underneath cars. They were asking people to open up their trunks. So we felt a little bit safer because they were beginning to inspect all the vehicles that were going into the post. Okay, here's another technique that we call walkabout debriefing. You go and do outreach work. Remember, as a military mental health provider, and you'll also do this as a civilian provider, is you'll do home visits to family members. You can go to the unit location. Let's say if the person belongs to your infantry unit and you're a civilian, and there's a problem between your soldier and his first line leader, they'll ask you to take a visit to the work site, and you'll actually go there, drive your car, and you'll talk to this commander at the commander's office, okay? Or if you're working within children and families, you can conduct individual or couples therapy in the home. So outreach is a very, very important concept to military mental health. Okay? You go where your client is, because we do not necessarily have an office. Our office is wherever our clients are. In this case, we were talking to some of the survivors there. Okay. What's the concept about being there where the warfighter is, or being there for the family members? I want us to remember the acronym PIE, P-I-E. You're in close proximity to your client. You're there. If your client is having a marital problem in the house, you can make a home visit, okay, with permission from your supervisor. Immediacy. As soon as they are having this argument, she calls you up and says, Mr. Jones, you're my social worker. Can you please come help us? We're having this marital problem now. Can you see us right away? Sure, I'll be there within 30 minutes. Okay, so you're there immediately after the problem begins. And then third is expectancy. You're going there with a sense of hope, and you're reinforcing the sense of optimism that, yes, I'm here to help you, and it's going to be a lot better after we go through our therapy. Okay? I know there's a light at the end of this tunnel. You're not getting along with your husband now, but I can surely tell you, after you and I have been talking to each other, doing a lot of consultations, your relationship will improve. Okay? So there's the expectation that your client is going to get a lot better. And that's called PIE. P-I-E. Proximity, immediacy, and expectancy. Some of the open-ended questions that I've asked are, can you tell me what happened? There's a client, and she was the nurse who gave Major Hassan his immunization shots, right? So she comes walking in there, and she's so disgusted with herself. And then I ask her, well, what's your name? Oh, my name is Nurse Jones, we'll call her. And I go, well, you look so down. You know, tell me what's going on. She said, well, you know what, sir? I was the only person that went the extra mile for one person. And you know who that person is? It was Anthony Hassan, or it was Major Hassan. And I go, okay, well, what's making you feel that way? And she says, well, he wasn't getting his shots. So you know me, I'm a really good nurse, and I really want to go the extra mile for people. If they're feeling disgusted and angry, I try to get down to their bottom line, and I help them. Well, he was really disgusted, and he finally came to me and said, can you help me? All I need is my shots, and then I'm done. And she says, well, you know what, Col Reyes? I gave him all his shots, and I gave him a smile. And I said, well, okay, that's good. I'm glad that you did what you did, because can you tell me where you were at the time that he started shooting? Yes, I was standing up, and I was talking to a person on my right, a soldier on my right, and another soldier on my left. When he started shooting, I turned around, and I saw him, and I saw this red light come on my chest. And I said to myself, oh my gosh, why is he aiming at me? But then he pointed the red light to the guy next to him, and he shot him. And he pointed the red light to the person next to her left, and she shot him. So I said to nurse, I said, does that change your mind about you helping Major Hassan? And she says, well, yeah, now I know why it was important for me to help him, because he killed the guy on my left and he wounded the guy on my right. He aimed the red light at me, but he moved it away and shot the people next to me, but he left me alive. So, ladies and gentlemen, what you do good for other people, it comes back to you. In her case, it did. And when I did cognitive behavioral therapy on her, and I made her aware that there was a silver lining in her thought process, that she was feeling guilty that she helped the killer, but then I helped her realize that she also saved her life. Okay? So I wanted her to substitute that the fact that she's alive for the fact that she was feeling bad and because she helped the killer. Okay? Okay, this is the command consultations that we did for the unit. Major Brand standing next to me is the commander of the 467th, and 1908th, and then Major Suttinger on your right is the commander of the 467th. So what we did was we talked to them and asked them, well, what kinds of problems are your units experiencing since that time? When you do consultation and education, you have to be a good advocate as a mental health provider. In other words, do not be intimidated by talking to individuals in leadership roles. Okay? That's why it's really important to maximize your clinical training, or if you are very good in DSM, be the best diagnostician you can be. Because in the military then, you have these young MBA graduates, 26-year-old first lieutenants who are commanding platoons, and they don't have an idea what the DSM-3 is. But it's your job to be a good advocate, because you are advising your commander about your client's mental health needs. So you better be good at the lingo, you better be good at diagnosing, and you better be good at assessing, because you're going to have to explain that in a way where your business graduate commander can learn. Okay? Okay. When you conduct the unit needs assessment, there are some questions that you need to ask. What's happened? Tell me what happened that day. Okay. Number two is, as a response to the trauma, what have you been hearing your soldiers talking about? What are they talking about since then? Are they scared? Are they fearful? What are their feelings that they've been expressing? And then fourth, what resources have you got to deal with those feelings? Because that's where you kind of introduce yourself and say, well, I'm a military mental health provider. We can provide you with support so that we can talk to your people for their fears. Okay? And how is their mission being affected? This is where you use your EAP skills. Is look, all your unit members are feeling anxious today. So why don't we set up this anxiety reduction group for them? Okay? And that's how we'll help your unit. Okay? We have a mission, and we'll set up this 8-session anxiety reduction group, and by the 9th day, they'll all be feeling less anxious. Okay, one of our other jobs, and this is what we found out from our command consultation with the unit commander. He said, look, I have a lot of injured people, and this is a social worker. She was severely wounded, but now she's able to walk. She's being discharged from the hospital to a step-down unit. He said the wounded individuals are feeling depressed because they are no longer moving forward with their friends. They're going to have to stay home, so they feel a sense of loss. They feel disconnected. They are grieving. They are feeling like they have a low self-esteem because they don't feel competent anymore. They are good therapists, but they can't practice as therapists because they have to heal first. So what we did was we provided her reassurance and let her know that once you get healthy again, you can kind of rehabilitate yourself and use your counseling skills once again. So we provided her lots of reassurance and support. Okay. The next intervention method that we use is post-incident debriefing. You guys heard of the Mitchell model? Mitchell model was used for CISM, critical incident stress debriefing. Well, we do not as military members use the Mitchell model anymore. We are using the Battlemind post-incident debriefings, and they consist of a lot of open-ended questions, where we don't lead them anywhere. We just allow them to, number one, discuss the facts. Number two is how they feel about what they experienced. And number three is what would they like so that they can cope better. Okay? Okay, one of the post-debriefings that we did occurred, after the memorial ceremony. The local VFW had provided them with a giant Texas barbecue, right? So one of their gifts was a big belt that they gave them, Texas belt-sized belt buckles, to kind of acknowledge their concern for the young people. So everybody that attended the big Texas-style barbecue got a nice gift. So we were going from person to person, and we were actually doing debriefings as they were finishing up their meals. And they really, really enjoyed that because their defenses were down, so they can talk more. And I remember one guy that I saw, he had finished his ribs, and he said, "Sir, I don't think that this was not planned." And I said, "Why?" "Well, because I was the guy that witnessed a gun battle between Major Hassan and a police officer." And I go, "Oh, really?" "Yeah." And all of a sudden he gets up from his chair, and he was still kind of hyper aroused, and he was saying, "Sir, I saw Major Hassan. He was standing there in a hallway, and he had both guns at the ready. And then this policewoman, she ran up, right? She didn't see him at first until he stood there on the right, and she stood there on the left, and they saw each other, and they were like two cowboys at the OK Corral about ready to draw on each other. So what happened was they both drew their weapons, and they started firing at each other like it was the Wild West. And then the whole time my guy was just kind of really being hyper about his explanation. You know, he had a really strong affect, and he was saying, you know what? Because he had laser sights, he was able to shoot her, and he wounded her on their leg. So when she fell down, then she fell down, and she realized that she was wounded, so she immediately got up and she ran around the corner to try to escape and evade him. But being the guy that he was that day, he actually followed the wounded officer, right? So she was running away from him, and he was pursuing her. So she finally turned around, and then she kept firing at what she had, right? And so, because he laser sighted her again, he was able to shoot her on the other leg, and that's when she fell completely down. And luckily, what saved her from getting polished off by Hassan was the fact that more policemen were running to the scene. So he ran away from her while she was down on the ground, and so my guy was telling me this with a full affect and pretty excited. Okay, so when you do your debriefings, it's all about timing. And here's another wounded soldier we had been debriefing. Okay, we were asked to see how you take a look at your client caseloads is this. Look at it as kind of concentric circles, okay? The little circle is the soldiers that we saw. But who is affected after you see those soldiers is the family members of the dead and the wounded. So what we did was we made contact immediately after the memorial ceremony with the family members. And so we did a lot of grief work. So when you're with family members, that's what you do, is you do grief counseling, okay? You meet up with the family members, and the first thing you want to say is, I'm sorry for your loss. My name is Col Reyes, and I'm a debriefer. And this is what I did to this family members. I extended my condolences, and after that I said, listen, if there's anything you need to know, want to know, I'm here for you. Is there anything you want to talk about? I'm here for you as well. And then we had a great conversation, and they were so happy that, you know, a debriefer was there so they can kind of open up and talk about it. There's one of my other debriefers talking to them as well. And the son of one of the victims was so happy that he gave some people a hug afterwards. So you know that you made a difference, because when you talk to the family members, if they give you this kind of reaction, then you know you've hit a chord, and you know that's the reason why you're there. And for me, it was kind of fulfilling just to know that he was very responsive to our interventions. Okay, so what we're doing in the debriefings is we're actually conducting in our minds triage all the time. So you're kind of looking to see how that person is reacting to your debriefing on the run. So if the person just wants to talk with you, and you know that he's going to be okay, but he still needs to talk with you and he won't let you go, then you stand with him until the person's completed with his story. And that's what we call help in place. It's like Lucy or Charlie Brown, you know, sitting there with the psychiatry help for a nickel, you know, and he's standing in his booth, and the guy talks to him for 5 minutes, and he says, I'm good now, thanks a lot. Well, that's what we call in the military help in place. Okay? Now, if you find out that the person may respond well to a secondary screening because he has a lot of affect and he's telling you of a specific problem, okay, he's telling you that he cannot sleep. I had a client that said, look, sir, I was one of the nurses there that had one of the dead in front of me, and I gave him my last breath. You know, I gave him all I had, but there's nothing else I could do. He just died in my arms. I said, okay, well, what happened next? Well, that day I keep blaming myself because I thought I was the best nurse ever, and this guy died in my arms. So I can't sleep. I blame myself. I feel at a loss every day. I can't function at work. So I said, okay, well, look, I'll help you. I'll make a referral for you, and I'll make an appointment, okay? And at that point, once you figure that she needed grief work, then at that point, you refer out to continuing care, because your job is screening, and it's not long-term therapy. Okay, so you say to you ask yourself, well, now that you've done the debriefings and the walkabouts, where are you going to conduct the post-incident screening? Okay? This is what we held at the gym, because everyone who was at the affected sites that day weren't able to finish their examinations. So what we did was we moved all of the providers and all the doctors and all the nurses over to the gymnasium, and we conducted the physical examinations there. Plus, we added a mental health site, and we called that the Behavioral Health Post-Incident Screening Site. And I'll show you what it looked like in just a second. All right. This is a what we call the OQ45 form, okay, and that's our screening tool, our screening form, and it takes 3 values, actually 4 values. The first one is the PCL-17, and the PCL-17 is what the VA is using at this time to determine the intensity of a person's PTSD symptoms. Okay, so if you ask yourself, well, how and what am I going to work on when I'm doing long-term therapy? These are always the issues: self-esteem, trust, intimacy, control and competency, and safety. You got it right there. What we need to look at with our own clients then is a strength-based assessment. Is when you do your assessment, I want us also to assess for a person's individual psychodynamic and interpersonal strengths. Is, are you a good communicator? Are you a good problem solver? Are you good under stress? Tell me what works for you to help you get out of difficult situations. That's what we call post-traumatic growth. Because there's a lot of individuals that are very resilient, and that's what you have to identify with your clients. If you're going to work military or if you work as a civilian, it's important to help train him or her in resiliency skills training. That's a very, very important skill that we have as social workers, is we help to identify what the person's good at and encourage his sense of competency by encouraging him or her to maximize those strengths. Because a lot of individuals have experienced trauma in their lives. I mean, we as combat veterans come home and we develop new goals. We decide that we're going to get our graduate degree in social work, okay? Those are goals, or those are a sense of new meanings that we have for ourselves through trauma. And that's what I want you to encourage in your own clients, and also in yourselves, is if you ever wanted to get that PhD, go for it. If you ever wanted to, make $1 million, fine. If you ever wanted to be more active in your church, if you ever wanted to give food for the poor, now's the time to do it, because you need to find a sense of meaning and purpose in your life through this traumatic situation. They have what we call measures in place to provide continuing care for the soldiers that are going to get deployed that were affected. They're planning to send a group of CSC debriefers into the country, into Iraq and Afghanistan at certain points, and provide them with counseling support. Okay? Number 2 is they have a surveillance team by Centers for Excellence in Health. It's a DoD group that will kind of give them these questionnaires on a periodic basis, and from there kind of glean information that will help them find out, help provide them with training so that they can kind of continue their resiliency. In other words, if the scores show that there's a lot of anger in the unit, they'll send a group of trainers to Afghanistan and Iraq to provide them with anger management skills training, okay? So that they can kind of provide them with training and support. And then third is they're going to give them the PDHRAs there in country while they're there. The PDHRAs are the post-deployment questionnaires that we give soldiers once they come back, but we're going to give it to them while they're there so that we can find out if there are any values that are relevant to suicidal thoughts, substance abuse, or depression. Okay? So there are 3 systems that they're planning to put in place that will kind of provide them with continuing care while they're in the war zone. We ourselves had experienced strong emotions, and we were the debriefing team. So what we did was, after our work day was done, then we would debrief ourselves. And we would make it a point where we would do our own after-action report, after-action review, and we'd kind of dismiss ourselves from the place, remove ourselves physically from Fort Hood, and drive to a restaurant and kind of sit and talk with each other and support each other. And the 3 questions that I ask of my team are, number 1 is, what was your most difficult case for the day, right? And then number 2 is, how did you feel about it? And then number 3 is, what are you doing to cope? So that's a way that we establish self-care for ourselves. And you guys are going to be in a very, very work-intensive environment. As a result, I wanted to ask you to kind of get in touch with your strong points and your weaknesses and learn to be a balanced person. I think this is the greatest profession there is in the world, because not only can we take care of other people, but we can work on ourselves simultaneously, right? So that means that we have to know what our tolerance level is with our clients, especially when working with family members of the military or soldiers, because you will get burned out if you don't have a point where you have to ask yourself, well, I need to take time out. So pay attention to your self-care. Working with a person and he's already showing one of the cluster symptoms, let's say hyperarousal, he'll say, you know, Chief Gunny, I have this friend and he's having trouble sleeping at night. And he does whatever he can, but he can't because he has nightmares. So your question should be straightforward, because as Dr. Cole wrote in his book, the values of the military are being straightforward. If the person gives you a straightforward response, give him a straightforward answer. So in this case, he's telling you, I have a friend, and you want to pull it back and turn the table on him and say to your client, does that friend happen to be you? Okay? So just be straightforward. The other famous one is, hypothetically speaking, there's this individual who, you know, has difficulty communicating with his wife. And then you would say, hypothetically, would that be you? Okay, there you go. That's how I would kind of technique it. It was Captain Gaffney, because Captain Gaffney was my soldier, right? So he worked here in San Diego. So I had a lot of trouble because someone had described to me the way Captain Gaffney died, because when he threw the chair at him, he was within a few feet away from the shooter. So the shooter just basically he opened up his chest with bullets, right? So the way he died was very, very gruesome, because basically he couldn't breathe anymore, and so he had convulsions. And for the client to describe that to me about his last moments in life, it made me sad, because I knew the guy, you know, I'd bunked with the guy, and so at that point, that's when I asked for our first group debriefing, is in response to my feelings of negative countertransference. Was I asked my whole unit of debriefers if we can go out to the restaurant and afterwards have a debriefing among ourselves, because there's a couple things that I need to tell them. So I just needed my colleagues to ventilate, and I needed to take care of myself. So I just asked for help. Thanks.